Hello, welcome and good evening. My name is Phil Nugden. I'm an alumnus of the Stern School of Business, undergraduate class of 2012. I also serve on the NYU Stern Alumni Council as Vice Chair of Signature Events. I'm excited to be here tonight with you this evening for a very incredible program. It's great to see so many alumni come out to this event, and I'm happy to see that I recognize a few faces. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Kristen Sosulski, author of the recently published book, Data Visualization Made Simple, Insights into Becoming Visual, in conversation this evening with Helen Todd, co-founder and CEO of Sociality Squared. Professor Sosulski joined NYU Stern in 2011 and is currently the Clinical Associate Professor of Information Systems and the Director of Learning Science Lab, where she develops immersive online learning environments for the business school education. Since 1999, Kristen has been developing digital online learning experiences for college students, first at Columbia University and now at Stern. She's the author of 2 previous books, Essentials of Online Course Design, a standards-based guide, and The Savvy Student's Guide to Online Learning. Kristen has taught both MBA students and professional executives data visualization, computer programming, and business operations throughout the world, including New York, Shanghai, and Panama. Her area of expertise lies in learning science, technology, and data visualization, which you won't find surprising given the title of her new book. Our moderator this evening is Helen Todd, co-founder and CEO of Sociality Squared, a full-service social media agency that helps brands harness the power of social media to increase their online reach and build loyal communities. Helen co-founded Sociality Squared in 2010 to help brands leverage the power of word of mouth and content. Thank you to both for being here this evening. Data Visualization Made Simple was published by Routledge just a few weeks ago and is sure to be a favorite amongst academics and industry experts alike. This book is a practical guide to the fundamental strategies and real-world cases for data visualization, an essential skill required in today's information-rich world. After the talk, we hope that you will join us as we continue the conversation during a reception and book signing right here in this room. And now, please allow me to hand over the stage to Kristen and Helen.
It's such an honor to be here. And the social media person inside of me has to also point out the hashtag for the evening is becoming visual. But yeah, back in 2010, I actually got to meet Kristen and spoke at the classroom, and it's such an honor to be on stage with you here tonight.
Oh my gosh, Helen, this is terrific, and I'm so happy. I wouldn't want anyone else to be here. So, do you know that you were the first CEO that I brought into my Stern classroom?
Not until I saw the notes for this talk tonight. Yeah, I know. I looked at my emails, and then we got to work together in 2016, and that was really the kernel of the idea for this book. And it's been so wonderful to get to see it come full circle from an idea. A lot of people have ideas, but not all ideas turn into physical things. And we're in for a special treat because everyone will get to see the book at the same time for the first time tonight, including Kristen. So we'll get a special unboxing. But let's dive into why we're here. We're here to talk about data visualization. So what was your aha moment that got you into data visualization?
So like many of us, my aha moment came in grad school. So I thought that I would tell a little story about how this came to be. So I have a few slides, but I was at Columbia University and I was studying for my doctorate, and I was working with a professor who wanted to figure out how he could teach aspects of building suspense in a film. I was like, what? I'm like an ed major, like I have no idea about this. And so that was their driving question. How could he show students that actual structural elements of film, like actually literally where the camera is, could actually build suspense in a movie? So I got to watch lots of movies when I was in grad school. And we decided to pick a scene from a famous movie, Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 Psycho. How many people have seen the movie? All right, this will be easy. So do you remember the scene where Janet Leigh, who plays Marion, steals the money from the bank that she works at? And she's driving off in the car with $40,000 in the back seat, $300,000 in today's dollars. She stole the money. Anybody remember why she stole the money? To help repay her lover's debts. Okay? So she's driving, and all of a sudden she sees her boss. And this scene is a very, very powerful scene in the movie. So I thought we'd watch it together.
Marion, what in the world? What are you doing up here? Of course, I'm glad to see you. I always am. What is it, Marion?
So hopefully that jogged your memory for those of you who've seen the movie. And so working together with Larry Engel, the professor at Columbia that I mentioned, we were trying to slow down the film. So what we did was analyze this scene shot by shot. And this process was somewhat telling, gave some insight to kind of those things that might add to the suspense of the film. So I've slowed it down, shot by shot. You see Marion, you see what she's looking at, you see Marion. Okay, but this only told so much. I needed more data. And so what I did is I analyzed each shot for specific elements that spoke to the structure of the shot itself. Not the narrative, but the structure. For instance, the number of shots in the scene, there were 9. The length of each shot in seconds, and then the shot type. Now, a shot type, I had to actually create something called a categorical variable, right? So I described the medium close-up as giving it a value of 20, just showing the proximity of the camera to the subject as being closer, versus a full shot, which would be pulling out or further away. With me so far? Yeah. Then, I visualize this. So it's able to see, the white line shows me the shot length. We know there's 9 shots in the scene already. First shot being longer, last shot being longer, like maybe some shorter shots in the middle. And then up top, we see the shot type, which I just described to you, the proximity of the camera to the subject. So what does this reveal? Well, let's go back to the film. First shot, we're going to call that a medium close-up. Second shot, Marion's point of view. The camera pulls out a little bit. Third shot, back to a medium close-up on Marion. Fourth shot, what she sees. Do you see the alteration happening? Marion, what she sees. Marion, what she sees. We continue on until we reach the point at which the boss has that point of recognition. And then there's a close-up on Marion to build that suspense, and then that music that I won't try to imitate, that's the psycho music. And then the scene, and then again, on her boss, and seeing Marion drive away. And so for me, this being able to visualize film or visualize art, that was it for me. And visualization has been part of my practice and what I do to communicate through my teaching, but also anytime we work with data to communicate a message and insight, and so forth. So what this can also show is really the deliberate decisions that Alfred Hitchcock made in designing this film. And so being able to see that together and stripping away the visual content and looking at it in this way. We showed this to students at Columbia University as part of a research study, and they were able to identify different patterns of different directors on how they construct scenes. It was just an amazing experience for me, and I wanted to share it with you. So,
this was the first time I saw this too. It was so fascinating, and especially since it combines the art with the data, which I think your book does a lot. But this is your third book. Your first two were on online course design. You teach this to undergrads and grad students. Why turn it into a book?
Oh my goodness. Well, how many students are in the audience? Former students of mine. Woo! I really have to give all the credit to my students. You've challenged me to build the business case for why data visualization is important to managers, not just, a skill that you're going to give an intern to do. This is something that is really so important for management and leadership to communicate anything from, productivity to predictions.
That's great. And Jim, a mutual friend of, actually a friend in the audience too, uses and references your first book, Online Course Design, all the time for his work in online course design. Mm-hmm. Do you see this as a tool, and how do you see people using the book?
That's a great question. So I've designed the book to be a reference. Really, so there's a great chapter on design that provides you with a checklist. So if you already know how to build visualizations and you just want to kind of refine them, there's a checklist that you can use, or something that you can use to mentor others. I have a series of what I call archetypes. They're really like chart templates that's in the last chapter that will just give you kind of a head start on how to build the 9 basic charts to maximize readability and clarity.
In talking about the chapters, what other chapters can readers expect from the book?
So the first chapter, it's called Becoming Visual. And that chapter is really where I'm trying to persuade my readers to build visualization as part of your practice. I see it as the extra 20% of anytime you're working with data, the extra 20% that we want to put in to make sure that insight, that finding, all that great research and analysis that you've done really shines through. And so building that into your practice is quite important. And so that's the first chapter. The second chapter, what everybody wants to know is the tools, right? What's the best tool to visualize data? And they're going to change. So I do introduce you to several types of productivity tools. We call those like Microsoft Excel or Google Charts, things that we might use in our everyday business practice. And then there's other tools that are specialized visualization tools like Tableau, for instance, or ArcGIS if you're doing any kind of geospatial visualizations. And then I provide a framework for how to evaluate the best tool for your task, but also for if you're the one leading up analytics and visualization in your company, which tool should you pick? And so I have a checklist that helps you think about, the interoperability, the sharing capabilities, all these different kinds of questions you should be kind of asking. So that's the first couple chapters.
Well, one thing that I thought was really interesting when we were talking, and the video kind of illustrates, is data visualization is really bringing together design and data science together, which if you're a data scientist, maybe the design portion could be a little intimidating, or a designer, maybe the data side. But you address that in the book too, right?
So for non-data folks, there's a chapter on data, so how to structure your data for different types of charts. There's a whole section on data integrity, making sure that you know what your data means in the real world, because sometimes we throw these things in software and the output, we believe it. And so kind of developing that as part of your practice. And then there's a chapter for data scientists that might not have been trained in design to really guide you in these different design principles that are influenced by folks like Edward Tufte and Amanda Cox and Donna Wong and many others.
Yeah, it sounds like real tips for real people to bring it to life. And one thing, when we were talking a couple years ago, I know you spent a lot of time thinking about the words becoming visual, and it's in the title of your book, it's your website and hashtag. Can you tell us why you selected or use those words specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's very deliberate by selecting the word becoming rather than be visual, to suggest that we're all, visual beings and have designed things before. And so we're not starting at zero. And so that becoming suggests that there's some past history, some prior knowledge that you have about visualization and data graphics, and that is going to be developing, whether in the present and maybe into the future.
That's great. I love that. And one thing that you had written in a recent article and changed this is you referenced Marshall McLuhan's "The medium is the message" and applied that to data visualization. And can you elaborate for those in the room today?
Yeah, so there's a famous book by Marshall McLuhan called Understanding Media from 1964, an oldie but goodie. And I've been really influenced by a lot of communication theory. And this famous quote, "The medium is the message," suggests that it's not necessarily the content of the message, but it's actually the form, the media or the medium, that has the ability to possibly change the pace or scale of our everyday behaviors. Okay, so that's a little theory part. And how we apply that to data graphics. If you think of data graphics as a medium, and it's the way in which we expect to consume data these days. Think about it. Pick up the newspaper. It's not like we're going to see a big spreadsheet. And so we watch a tennis match. The serve percentages are visualized right in front of you. And so this is a interesting way to kind of talk about visualization as a medium and think about how it changes the scale at which we can consume data and information in today's data-driven world.
And speaking about the different types of mediums, and you pointed this out before, the difference between designing a data visualization for an iPad versus a PowerPoint. Can you talk to us about the different, or I guess keeping the medium in mind when you're designing?
Yeah, so format matters. So if there's any web designers in the audience, you've probably done a lot of cross-platform testing of your websites and things like that. But you kind of have to do the same thing for your visuals. So what I mean by that is when you design something for the screen to be projected, make sure that it's readable. And it's going to be much different in terms of how you showcase that data visualization. You might not show all the data at once. You might deliver it with a progressive reveal, show one data point at a time. So think about your role in showing that data graphic. So that's for when you give live presentations. Think about when it's on an iPad or for the web. Data graphics, we want them to be interactive. We've all seen the amazing graphics from the New York Times, being able to kind of develop your own story, put in your zip code or some aspect of that's personal to you that the data graphic allows the result to show, well, what's the median income in household income in my neighborhood or in my census tract. So those types of things, you have to think about how the user is going to interact with it. Imagine if it's for print. What kind of narration will be provided or descriptions?
And I love what you said at the beginning about going the extra 20%, and that in the storytelling element, it can really help illustrate a story better. And can you share a little bit more about what that means in this context?
Absolutely. So I have a joke in my class, it's great to highlight things in your data graphics. So say, just think about a line graph, but you don't want to highlight everything because then nothing stands out. And so the careful use of color, the careful use of what you show, we might have all the data. I could probably have mapped out, all of Psycho for you. That might have been a little bit too overwhelming, for a 3-minute presentation, right? So think about the amount of data that you show and the level of knowledge and prior knowledge of your audience. You really want to be able to connect with them, and don't be afraid to use interaction just because you're using data graphics. Another thought that comes to mind is if you're going to show it, you need to explain it. So a lot of times, and we've all seen this, somebody just kind of cuts and pastes something that they found on someone else's website, a nice little chart that might illustrate an important aspect, but it's never spoken to. So that's always something to consider.
Well, and I love one thing, going back to Psycho, is not only can it help tell a story, but it could actually help people look at things differently too. Can you share some more examples of that?
Certainly. I mean, being able to see, for instance, seasonal trends. So if I'm just looking at what happened today, which might be a single number of my sales, being able to put that in context and see that, there's a similar pattern that takes place, every December or something like that. That's like one example.
And I think, and even where people can ask questions about the data and finding what X and the relationships of Y, what are some of the questions that people ask when they're looking at the data?
Great. So one that I just covered, but what's changed, right, since from today, from a year ago, from 5 years ago? What's similar? What's different? So comparisons and contrasting items. What proportion of something makes up the whole? So if we're looking at other things are, how close in proximity is X to Y if we're thinking about locations, whether we're looking at city bike rentals and locations and their usage and their productivity, or if we're looking at the running paths of people who run using a Nike app and kind of see those different pathways that they may take and traverse through a city.
You recently did an interview on a podcast about the book, and you referenced one of your favorite case studies, which is also in the book, which was really interesting. Can you share that with us today?
So the author of that case study is actually in the audience.
Oh, really? I didn't realize that.
So my former student and a major contributor to the book, Andrew Hamlet, did this amazing case study where he used Twitter data to see if he could predict the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. And I think he was right, which made the case study so amazing. And he visualized. He came up with an entire rubric and quantified various actions that people take on Twitter, like mentions and retweets and all of this, and looked at the presidential candidates and was able to kind of show who was leading at different points based on the metrics that he came up with. So that's my favorite case study. Check out chapter 8.
And I guess to your point earlier, they are for sale later, and Kristen will be doing signatures. I love that case study because it's future looking. And where do you see the future of data visualization going?
I mean, if you just think about how technology is becoming so much more responsive, and how we can kind of control the temperature of our house remotely and all these things, and we're seeing metrics about ourselves or our spaces around us that the visualizations are really, I hope one day they'll be a master dashboard. I can see my whole life in front of me. But I mean, there's of course some danger to that, but I really see the future as being visualization really becoming the interface for how we interact with spaces and places.
And I think that goes back to the words becoming visual too, that we're all becoming visual, and speaks to that a lot.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things, I know we've got Q&A and then some networking afterwards. One thing that you mentioned in the book is a party favor, and you apply that to a design principle to data visualization. Can you tell us what you mean by party favor in the book?
Yeah. So chapter 9, where I kind of leave you with some archetypes or templates for building your own data graphics. There's also a few what I call cognitive shortcuts, and one of them is the party favor, or you can call it the wedding favor. So when you leave a wedding, you always get a nice little trinket to remember the day. Well, think about that every time you create a data graphic. What's the takeaway? What do you want your audience to leave with? And so a quick way to remember that is the party favor.
That's cool. And one thing I didn't realize until we were prepping for this is that there's 30 different types of charts. And I guess the podcast said that there's some people don't like pie charts. I didn't know that. Do you have a favorite chart? And can you tell us a little bit more about how you decide to use which chart for what?
Oh, that's a great question. So, and there's a really simple answer. It all depends on your data. So if you don't have location, like latitude or longitude or zip code, guess what? No maps, right? You can't use a map. So that's obvious. If you don't have time series data, like an element of time, no line charts. Sorry. So your data really does dictate the category of charts that you can choose from. So if we're talking about time series, there might only be like 10 to choose from, for instance. And I'm always a fan of like the geospatial displays because I just think it's so great to kind of visualize the space around us. So those I tend to gravitate towards.
And I think at the podcast you actually said that we as humans actually are able to digest length better than the pie chart. Is that?
Yeah. So there's been research that probably many of you have heard of about that as humans that we can discern and detect length better than we can of area. So like a wedge of a pie, like how big is this one versus the length of a bar. So if you're showing ranking in terms of like, who has the highest score in a test out of like 30 students, you'd see like a nice long bar and then you'd see that person that got like their 40 at the end. So it's very easy to see and detect that type of pattern and insight, like mins and maxes, minimum values and maximum values pretty easily with bars. A lot harder when we're looking at proportions in a pie.
Yeah, I thought that was so interesting. And in the book, you also, you mentioned Tufte and are talking about 30 different charts, and you mentioned the New York Times. Are there any data visualizations that you think are the most beautiful, or is like the New York Times a great example of really pushing the envelope for using data visualizations today? Well,
I'm the biggest fan of Amanda Cox from the New York Times, so anything that she does I think is amazing. And and she does add a lot of like beauty and aesthetic elements to her charts, which I love. She has one about how people spend their time, which I think is great. And you can look at, for instance, you can compare how like unemployed versus employed people spend their time. And you'll see it's a 100% stacked area chart if you want to know the technicalities. But you'll see that people that aren't working, how much more time they spend on movies and TV. So there's like funny and fun insights. It's also interactive. So I could choose, all my attributes, employed, female, blah, 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 and see how people like me spend their time.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And what are, you mentioned Tufte, what are some of the other, I guess, thought leaders in the field that have shaped your work or that you mentioned in the book?
So I mentioned already Amanda Cox, David McCandless, and Lee Byron. They're really big in the field of visualization. They have a famous TED Talk, which is I think you've seen it, one of my favorite graphics. Them also, this woman who works at the Fed right now, Donna Wong, she's done some amazing work. It actually was an assigned textbook for my students about how to communicate like financial data like really, really clearly, and how to build your own metrics that you can visualize. So not just take the data how it is, but actually build in your own percentage change or something like that as your own metric. So these are some of my influences for sure.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned the one case study. What are some of the other ones? Because students did help contribute more to the book too, right?
Yeah, so there, aside from case studies, there's actually interviews. So there's an interview from a former student on how she used visualization for her HR consulting practice. There's a visualization around how you look at the pathway to conversion for a product. So by device type. So maybe you're on your phone and you start browsing and you like something in Amazon and you put in your shopping cart, but when do you actually convert? Do you convert when you get home on your laptop? Do you convert on your tablet when you're like in bed reading? Like at what point does that happen? So that's really an interesting visualization that you'll see in very sophisticated in chapter 2. So those are just some examples.
And who would read your book? I mean, you mentioned students, but also MBAs.
I hope everyone. My goal is really just to make it accessible. It's accessible to anyone from, designers to data wonks is kind of my tagline, but really anyone who is interested in using data to tell stories or have an alternative means for exploring data visually. So and that gives an access point. You don't have to be a data scientist to visualize data. And I think visualization gives you an access point to really working with data if it's something that's new to you.
Can I read a line from your manifesto?
Okay.
I really recommend this article that she did and changed this. Ultimately, the way information is consumed by the audience and their impact on our understanding of the world is on the shoulders of the creator and the medium they choose to convey it. So no pressure for anyone on data visualization. What does this mean to you in the context of today and all of the data visualization that's out there?
Look, if you're building it, you're completely in charge of what you show. So if you decide to show only part of the story, show a time series from 2016 on, what happened in 2015? You chose to omit that data from your visualization. So it's really how you show it, what you're showing, and then how you show it. Or you decide to show it where you show it all at once, or you kind of tell a story with it and show point by point. So that's another thing. So you're kind of in complete control of the message and the delivery of it if you're building it.
And I actually got to hear you speak at the New York Times offices to a group of industry professionals. And I believe you are also known for taking photos of examples in the media of data visualizations gone wrong, can we say? What are some common mistakes that you see?
Just use over-exaggeration of the data graphics to represent the data. And so what I mean by that is maybe there's a 1% change, and the exaggeration shown in the graphic shows a 400% change to kind of make a point or a statement, but it's really lying with data. So I've seen that quite often. I have a fun collection. I should do an Instagram on it, I think.
Yeah, or we'll save that for another presentation. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left, and then we're going to be opening it up to audience Q&A, so definitely get your questions ready. So I guess one thing that I find really fascinating is one, the combination of your love for the arts and then for data science and learning, and how you merge all of that together. And when you are thinking about data visualization and your students and having the message received, how do these worlds collide for you when it comes to learning science and data visualization?
That's really something I've thought about a lot. And I'm still working on my answer, so I'm developing it. But I really see visualization as a way to provide evidence. So if I make a claim, I want to show you what that means using data to support whatever it is that I'm showing. And so for those of you in grad school, cite your sources, right? And so it's the same type of thing. To be able to provide evidence for why a particular phenomena or trend is happening, and to be able to not just say it, but to show it. And that's always been a big part of my practice. And for students in here, most of my class, you're working. I try not to talk all that much. And the idea is that to be able to learn by doing, and that's where kind of that title, Becoming Visual, came into, so that it's a practice and it's a process. And so it's something for you to do, not just kind of observe.
Oh, and one thing that you had mentioned when we were talking prior to this is to also let people know that they're not alone and to talk to people, and the need to get out of your bubbles when you're talking about data too.
Yeah, one thing that is absolutely mandatory in like all the work that I do for myself. So my rule is show your work to others and don't be afraid to. It's really hard. It's really, really a difficult thing to do, but be able to open yourself up and allow that critique to happen. It will only make you better. And people will generally be excited about, providing that feedback. And so that's, when you create a data graphic, for instance, if we tie it back to that, show it to someone else. See if they have the same interpretation. If they have a different one, that might be something to worry about.
And better to do it before you put it on Twitter.
Yeah.
Well, and one thing that I learned from you, I learn every time we connect, is actually mastery. And since we're at NYU, I thought it would be interesting to ask the question, like, how does one become a master of data visualization?
Oh my gosh. The research that I've read about how people develop expertise, it takes a really long time. And it takes about at least 10 years, full time to be an expert in anything. And these days we think because we did a tutorial, we have this overconfidence that we can kind of just do it. And we usually can, right? Because being highly productive people, of course. But so it really does take, building things in and developing a practice and having that open-mindedness, being able to have the language to critique and also to be critiqued.
That's great. Let me do a time check. We have just a couple more minutes until questions, so get your questions ready. I guess, you set out to make a book as a tool open to everyone. What is your party favor that you want people to go home with? What's your one takeaway about either your book or data visualization that you want the audience to leave with?
Great. So that you're ultimately, the work that you do, you're ultimately designing for someone else. And so, just be really thoughtful. And all these things are about being thoughtful in those things that you create and you share, because you ultimately want people to understand your message and walk away not being tricked or confused or stumped, but really, really having that insight, that key insight, that message.
And who would have thought it started with Psycho?
Oh no.
Well, thank you so much. This has been an honor. But why don't we open up to the questions on the floor, so I'm not the only one asking questions. Do we have any? I guess we're just raising hands. Callie is the master. Okay, we have someone up here with a raised hands, and I think a mic will be coming to you in just a second.
Kristen, do you have any point of view on the future of 3D data visualization, particularly for use by data scientists in large corporate environments?
In this innovation lab that I work at Stern, there's been a few startups working in that space doing some visualization. That's been in 3D. I wore the goggles and everything, and I think it's about how that gets to being interpretable by a lay audience. Right now, I find there's a complexity needed, but for analysis, I see huge potential. Yeah, that's a great question.
Hi, Kristen. You mentioned Tableau.
Sure.
I'm interested to know which applications you use most for your visualizations. I've spent some time with ClickSense, and it's been quite well. Have you used that one as well?
I haven't. No. I use Tableau. I use Excel. And I also use R. So I do a lot of visualization with R and creating interactive Shiny apps, things like that, in addition to Tableau. That's usually my toolkit. If I'm doing anything complicated, geospatial, I'd go ArcGIS. For something simple, like even the Psycho, I might use, today I use Keynote because it's really simple and a lot of the design elements are already in place for me. I don't have to remove a lot of that chart junk, those grid lines and tick marks and all that stuff that really are those non-data elements.
Got it. And R is just the letter R?
Oh, so R is a statistical programming environment. Yeah. So you could also do visualization in Python, but R is really designed for working at data at the core. And it has a great number of packages for visualization.
Got it. Thank you.
I guess one question, if there's any more, where can people find you online and get the book? We could do a plug for your newsletter.
Oh, okay, yeah, sure. So you can, obviously you can get the book on Amazon. You can go directly to the publisher website at Routledge. I would encourage you to do that. There's a site called becomingvisual.com. And it's really for anyone in the world. There are a ton of tutorials and resources. It also has the accompanying resources that go along with the book. So you can try out the exercises on your own. You can download the data, all that good stuff. So becomingvisual.com. And you can follow me on Twitter. And that's usually where I post most of my updates. And then you'll get redirected from there.
And you mentioned a course, a new certificate at NYU too. Do you want to share about that?
So this is how all my worlds merge. So I'm offering an online certificate in visualizing data, and it's going to be from February 4th to March 31st. It'll be completely online, and it's based on the book. But it's and you can think of the book as becoming visual, and this is the practice of becoming visual is really what the course is all about.
Oh, we have a few more questions.
Yeah, I have a question.
good.
I'm way in the back. You kind of alluded to this in terms of you're saying certain data types are more conducive to certain types of visualizations, and then the person's question before about 3D, and you're saying that that's hard to interpret. And I'm just wondering if there are any sort of common misinterpretations of certain types of visualizations, similar to certain like linguistic common misinterpretations or quantitative common misinterpretations, just to know so that if you're presenting data to an audience that even if you don't intend to like you were saying with the exaggeration example, you don't intend to like confuse them, you do because of this common type of misinterpretation.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to my response of like sharing that with others. So pilot test it beforehand to kind of anticipate those common misconceptions, whether you're talking about like linguistical visualizations, right? So you need to have like a deep knowledge probably of that field or what those visualizations and relationships mean between words. So I would really start there. That makes sense.
Oh, I think, do you have a mic already? No. Okay. A mic is on the way.
Hi, I have a question. How do you think artificial intelligence is going to change or reshape data visualization?
That's really, really interesting. The analytics from it, for sure. Tell me what's happening behind the scenes. That's absolutely what I would want to know and be able to visualize in terms of artificial intelligence. What's the interaction between the user and the machine? And how can we see that behind the scenes? For not just one, but millions of people. I think that could be really, really amazing. I want to be able to do that with even how people traverse online courses and things like that. Those things are really interesting, and there's a whole area of learning analytics. So I imagine that with artificial intelligence, there's huge opportunity.
And you still need good data going as an input too, right? That's
Absolutely.
like a big part.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the problem with a lot of these systems today, is the interoperability between the data and the systems. And so getting it in the right form, being able to visualize it tends to be a big barrier to even beginning.
Great.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Oh, we have another one.
I was really intrigued with how you started with Hitchcock and analyzing the video. Given how video is becoming ever trendier, especially in the online landscape, I'm wondering if your research has included applying data visualization techniques to that format, whether you think that's a positive way of moving forward, or if an interactive is more useful, or any thoughts in that sort of realm.
Gosh, I would love to spend more time on that. Yes, I have thought about that, and I think the possibilities of being able to automate some of these processes is really exciting. Like what I showed you is a project from 2002 that I did by hand, right? So having that, I think, could really open the door to new possibilities, and using this kind of process even to look at anything, not just film, but if you're looking at like commercials and in this type of way, it could be really interesting. Yeah.
I think we have time for two more, and I think we've got two more hands raised, which is perfect.
Hi. What do you find that students have the most difficulty with in a course, say, you teach in data visualization?
My God, they're amazing. Nothing. They're teaching me. That's a very, very good question. I think it's about the rigor of putting that extra 20% in on refining the graphics. It takes time. And the reward isn't there until you show it to somebody. And so when you're doing the homework and the work, the reward necessarily isn't there, except maybe in the grade or something like that, until you're actually using it in real life. And so that bridge from theory to practice.
And I think one more question up here, and this will be our last question.
So you mentioned like trying to tell the story about your visualizations. I was wondering, prior to knowing what the story is, if there's a different mindset in terms of doing that discovery process or the different techniques around that.
Yeah, absolutely. I see visualization as having a dual role, one for data exploration, the other one for data presentation. And they're different. And usually you're doing the data exploration anyway. And so while it could be very easy to run summary stats, sometimes visualizing those summary stats to kind of see the presence of outliers, for instance, is a very important task.
Are the books here? Okay, the suspense is, speaking of suspense, well, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your time with us today. And let's all just give a round of applause and congratulations on your book.
Thank you so much, Helen. This is a great conversation. Thank you, Phil, for a wonderful introduction and your support, and to Callie Short, who arranged this whole thing. Amazing. So thank you.
Thanks again, Kristen and Helen, for an engaging and thought-provoking discussion. I know from personal experience, I work in investment banking, and we recently had a training course on presentations and best practices. And they basically told us, listen, if you have nothing new to present, which happens very often, present it differently. So definitely relevant to the real-world experience. And I want to say thank you to everyone and each of you in the audience for coming this evening to further your lifelong learning and to hear from Kristen and Helen. As you may have already heard, Kristen is offering an entire online certificate course in visualizing data beginning in February. This course will be open to all alumni and is geared toward those who want to incorporate and improve data visualization best practices. And as a closing note, I wanted to say your engagement with NYU Stern enriches our vibrant alumni community, and I encourage each and every one of you to continue attending these events and those in the future, including the upcoming FinTech conference. I believe there's flyers available in the back of the room for that, as well as supporting Stern's fundraising initiatives. I know many of you already donate both your time and resources to many initiatives at the school. And for that, we thank you a lot. It's definitely meaningful. It's very impactful. For those of you who are looking to be more engaged and more involved, there are many opportunities available for you to participate and stay engaged. One of these opportunities I want to speak today is continued giving. It's a benchmark that not only allows us to retain our reputation within NYU and competing business schools throughout the country, but also provides opportunities for scholarship opportunities to underprivileged students, as well as funding world-class research. So if you haven't given recently, I welcome you to do so through either an online appeal or through one of the envelopes available in the back of the room. And with that, we will now move on to the cocktail portion of this evening, where Kristen has graciously agreed to sign books. Hopefully there will be copies available for purchase towards the back of the room. And finally, I want to say as a final thank you to Kristen and Helen. Thank you for being here with us this evening, and please accept this as a token of our appreciation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.